Okay, everybody. We all here? Wonderful. Not very many people have deserted us yet. And there will be dessert after in just a little while. So I see all the nurses are leaving. Bye all. So if you have a table and you want to come and sit down at it, that would be really good, because we're going to start our little program with the book launch, and the first thing we want to do is invite Evangelist Hustler to come and say a few words about the book, because he's the only one here that's read it.
Oh,
Oh, Dr. Ram's read it as well. So that's good. So now on your table there is a question thing, and you've got a book. So if you want to, while you're listening to Evangelist Hustler wax elephants about how wonderful the book is, you might want to see if you can answer a few questions, because as I mentioned before, the table that gets the most answers right gets to do the dishes, and probably gets a chocolate reward as well. So thank you all, and thank you to all you that have helped out so far. So, Brother Hustler, if you would come, and remember that you are speaking to the world out there. So speak about how wonderful the book is, or something like that.
I will.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity to share. I have a copy here of an article that I wrote, or an email I wrote to Brother John Ram after having read this book. I'm a great fan of biographies. I love to read about what God has done in the lives of other people, and how he has used the lives of other people to be a blessing, encouragement, a challenge to his own people. And so when Brother Ram first asked me about having a look at his book, of course I jumped at the opportunity because I love biographies. But after having read it, this is what I actually wrote to him. I said, "This book will open your eyes to show how great and merciful God has been to the land down under." I was so blessed to read the rich spiritual history of our great nation. Of course, many times as I've travelled, I've rehearsed the nation of Australia's history from the point of view of a penal colony, which it was, but it wasn't just a penal colony. And while there were some brutal and cruel taskmasters during those early days and the formative years, God in his grace and mercy provided some wonderful men and women of God that really in many ways were the foundation. They laid the foundation, the backbone spiritually for the gospel in this country. And so I said how graciously God worked in Australia in those early days. I do believe, had it not been for the prayers and hard work of these sacrificial servants, the early days of settlement would have ended in total disaster. The saddest part of the whole book for me was a revelation that I knew so very little about these true heroes of the faith. Now, I knew the names of some of these. I knew of John G. Ridley. I knew of Samuel Marsden. I knew of Richard Johnson. I knew of Flynn and the Flying Doctor Service. But others I knew very, very little about. Being a Queenslander, I have to say that I knew nothing of John Dunmore Lang, who was probably one of Australia's earliest, greatest political leaders this country's had. And so it was quite shameful on my part to be so ignorant as someone who had always been a student of history and also a lover of biographies, to find out that I knew so little about these. And of course, one of the things that stands out in this book as you read the various sections on these different prominent Australian Christians is the men and women around them. It's amazing the number of people God used as they served God and touched the lives of others, and God really dispersed them abroad and did wonderful things. I think of the problems they were having in New Zealand and the supply of the sheep trade. I think there's more sheep in New Zealand now than there are people. There's probably more sheep in New Zealand than in the whole of the southern hemisphere. But that had its roots in a great Christian leader from this country. And so I knew so very little of these men and women who laboured for the furtherance of the gospel. Another tragedy is to find out how much of this rich heritage of the saints has been either lost, forgotten, or in some cases deliberately corrupted by these latter-day historians with no concern for God's truth or for that of a godly testimony. How tragic and yet how common it is among sinful, lost sons of men to want to trample the truth underfoot. It has been said that everyone has an agenda. At the end of the day, it is the glorifying of God or the exalting of man. I ask you to read carefully and prayerfully, with thanks to God, the stories of these men and women and the people in this book who magnified Jesus Christ with their lives. I don't think we fully understand, particularly in the early part of the book, the sacrifices men like Johnson and Marsden made when they came to this land to serve people and to serve God. They are men that are rarely ever spoken of today. Their families are rarely ever referenced today. And yet, much of the spiritual fruit that we have in our land today had its seeds sown in the sweat and the labours, the tears and the prayers of those men and women. And so I would encourage you, if you have opportunity, please get the book and read the book. This book will be a blessing to you. For those of you who are tuned in as preachers, pastors, this book is an essential to your library to have a knowledge of what God has done down under in the land of Australia, that we should be able to share that blessing with many other places around the world. Thank you, Brother John.
Well, that was a bit of a good review. You weren't expecting that, were you, Dr. Ram?
How much of my book have you read, Pastor?
All of it, except the bits I didn't read. Okay. Now, we have going to have a little bit of a couple of questions I'm going to ask Mr. Ram about his book, and so we'll do that, and then you as an audience can ask a few questions if you would like to ask some questions, and then Mr. Ram's going to do a short reading from a particular part of the book that he really likes, and after that we'll ask the questions and see who does the best on the answers. And because you've been so good, we're going to offer you a copy of the book at a special price of $5, which is a huge reduction from the $16 that it previously was. So you can buy a couple. We have a couple of boxes of it. You can buy some, take home, give to friends, whatever you'd like to do. But for now, I'm going to ask Mr. Ram, perhaps he can sort of share the microphone here with me. And just want to ask him a couple of reasons and a couple of things about the book. So, Mr. Ram, why did you write this book?
Okay, thanks, Pastor. Look, I originally applied to be a history teacher and get a scholarship when I was a young man, history and English. They came back with a scholarship to teach science. I was reasonable at science. And my father said to me, "It looks like you're going to be a science teacher, son," because that's how I was going to get through university. That's how I got through university. But I've had a love for history for a very long time, and it was probably one of my better subjects when I was a young man. But you have to do the things you do to make a career. So it goes back a long time. And my friend John Peters is here today, and we met at the local coffee shop at Huskisson, and we started developing a friendship, and John lived opposite John G. Ridley when he was a boy. And so John started giving me some of his books. Now, I knew of Ridley, but I did not know Ridley. So then I started reading some of his material and contacted Ruth Ridley, who taught my daughter, said that before, my wife in school in India, and then contacted Ruth. She's 87. I spoke to her on Friday, and she gave us permission to do Milestones of Mercy again. It's up there on the shelf. That is actually $5. And so we reprinted with a few additions. Ridley was very famous for a lot of his preaching and being a Baptist evangelist. So the story sort of developed through chatting with my friend John about history, and then John Ridley, and then republishing some of his work and so forth and so on. And then COVID hit. And besides being at home with my two girls, COVID hit, and what was I going to do? Well, I started researching some of the others and decided, well, I'm here in my office, I'll write. And by God's mercy, we came to the 7 prominent Australian Christians. So that's sort of the story. And for about 12 months before mid last year, I was just reading and writing and researching, and I loved it. And after I published the book, I read it 5 times and enjoyed it. I know that sounds silly, but that's really what happened. So there you go, Pastor. That's the background. And the more that I found out that I didn't know, I was going to call the book, I Never Knew That. That was the title. And my wife said, don't be silly. You know, like, you don't know a lot, really. There's a lot of things you don't know. So, but that's how the forward of the start of the book starts. I didn't know that. And so the more I researched, the happier I was. Great stories of great men, really.
Thank you, John. When we come to the book and thinking about it, you did a lot of research. Who was your favourite author of amongst those who you read and researched to produce this book?
I think as I did each chapter or each man, I loved them. It was great stories. There was so much, like, for example, Richard Johnson grew his cucumbers in Canterbury. Okay, so that was really great for me because I lived in Bankstown. So you just found it go. So that's what it was, Canterbury Vale. The second fleet arrived, devastating, but he fed them from his farm. You don't hear of the second fleet very much, and you don't hear of the ministry of the gospel preachers who kept those people alive by feeding them because there wasn't much grown, but Johnson was a successful farmer. I think I've settled on the map at the back, John Dunmore Lang. This last week I enrolled in a PhD to study some part of John Dunmore Lang's life. People do not know him because he has been squashed because of his probably mannerisms and a few things, and he was very straight Scottish preacher. So if you don't read very much, the 2 chapters on John Dunmore Lang will, how did Victoria start? How did Queensland start? How did Lang Park start? Sorry, just threw that in. So Lang, Pastor, to finally answer your question, it's probably the one that stands out the most.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Now, I guess if there was one book that you could read, and the only book that you could read, what do you think it would be?
If I had the time, I'd probably read a book by Stuart Picken and Bob Limner, 2 volumes, 19th Century Australia and 20th Century Australia. That's actually not the whole title, but they've just published in the last couple of years the Evangelical History of Australia. The books are very thick. Bob Limner just passed away, Stuart Pickens, An Older Man. Great, great books about Christian evangelical history of Australia. Each book runs 500 odd pages or more. Really worth a read if you want to. It's not really fiction. If you want to read about Australian evangelical history, that's the one.
Okay. Very good. All right. Now, perhaps you may have a question that you'd like to ask about the book, or about how Mr. Ram came to write it, or perhaps what he's thinking about doing next. Are you going to write another book?
After I finish my PhD, maybe.
It's
a few years tucked away there.
Yeah. Are there any questions that you'd like to ask? Okay. All right. That's fine. So what we're going to do now is John Ram's going to read a short passage from the scripture that he scripture. It's not scripture, from his book that he likes and that we hope that you'll enjoy too. There's lots of good stuff in this book, and there's lots of things where you can say, well, I didn't know that. But and then I'm going to ask the questions from the table. So hopefully you are getting some answers together on your table, right? And maybe I'll change the rules. Maybe we'll make it the table that gets the least ones right does the dishes. We'll see how that goes.
For those who had the questions in front of them, John Ridley was shot in the war with a big smack in the neck. So you can write that one down. There you go, there's a hint. Now, I'm on page 18 and 19, and I did not know that the second preacher that was come out to Australia was on the Second Fleet, John Crowther, and he came out on the Guardian, which was 42 metres long. 42 metres long, and had 1,000 tonnes of equipment, animals, plants. It was going to save the colony. So if you turn to page, let's see, 17, you will see the shipwreck of the Guardian. So they leave South Africa. This is the Second Fleet. And they head south, pick up the big winds near the Antarctic, go over towards Tasmania and so forth. So they went to the windy place to get there. So they came across an iceberg. I didn't know this. John filled me in on some of this story. If you came across an iceberg, it was fresh water. So you'd send your lifeboats out to collect whatever fresh water you could for the plants, animals, etc., that you had on your ship. Common practice. I didn't know that. Then fog came in, and his big ship, the Guardian, bounced off the iceberg 3 or 4 times, and it essentially lost its rudder and whatever else, and essentially became a raft. The second preacher was on it. He was supposed to be with Richard Johnson. They were supposed to supply supervisors for the convicts and tradesmen. All that was on the ship, all that the Second Fleet needed to deliver to the colony. So Rui, the captain, on page 17, invited the preacher down to his cabin and said, "What do you think, preacher?" And the preacher said, "Well, you know, I'm good, I'm happy." And Rui said, "My parents, my mother particularly, was a religious woman. I never took it on myself," and so forth and so on. But he said to, the captain said, "If you're going in the lifeboats, get in the biggest one. There's 5. The guy who's going to be in charge of that, he knows what to do." So anyway, half the crew get on the lifeboats. Rui stays on the ship, and Crowther gets on the wrong one. So those 2 boats come together. Crowther jumps, at Rui's insistence, jumps onto the big lifeboat, falls in the water, and they rescue him. Now the water would have been freezing cold. Rescue him. The lifeboat that he got in was the only one that survived of the 5. French boat picked it up a few days later, about 9 days later. Rui himself Took 9 weeks to get the raft, what was left, back to South Africa, Cape Town. Many of them went on to the colony after that. The convicts that were well behaved got released, got freedom. You know, you've 9 weeks on a raft in the Indian Ocean, why wouldn't you be free? And so forth. But the bit that is significant is Crowther went back to William Wilberforce, and resigned his commission. And Samuel Marsden, who was on a scholarship and in school, Crowther resigned, and the evangelical Christians said to Marsden, "You're going. We're paying for your education. Now it's time to go to Australia." Now, roughly that's the words. So that's how Marsden came out. He was a replacement. Never finished his formal education, but they put him through high school and so forth and so on. So Marsden was a farmer as well, and was a very successful farmer and helped the colony survive, obviously. Let me see. In 19, second paragraph, Crowther said, "In the bustle of embarking, I got into the wrong boat and found out my mistake too late to alter it. The boats, however, neared each other to make an exchange of some of the provisions, and I heard Rui, the captain, call out, say, 'If you've got heart, Crowther, jump.' So he jumped from one lifeboat to the other, and I'll just summarise the rest. But there you go. Rui was only 28, the captain. He died sometime later in a fight with the very famous Nelson. All right, so that's, I would commend that story to you, of God's grace, to the second preacher nobody's heard of. Nobody's heard that the Guardian had 1,000 tonnes of resources for the second fleet that never got there. They know of the second fleet, the one that carried the women. They know that one. And they know what happened when it landed. But Richard Johnson helped save many people when the second fleet arrived, because he could feed them and look after them. Anyway, Pastor, that's if I keep going, we'll be here for a while. But anyway, that's the story. Who knew? Put your hand up if you knew that story. Nobody knows that story. But there you go. Read it in the book.
I read it last year.
Yeah, read it last year.
Okay, thank you, John. Look, let's go through these questions and see how you go. So on your tables you have some questions from the book. So circle a number if the quote is from the book in the first section there. And so
would you like me to correct them, Pastor?
Yes, why don't you do that?
All right, so let me see. The first quote, "I am not afraid of storms." That's from Little Women, so it's not from my boat. "Is the possibility of having a dream come true?" That one is from a separate book called The Alchemist. "One of the worthiest men breathing." Has somebody got an answer for that? Yes, that's a Richard Johnson. Newton, the hymn writer, said that. So that's one there. "When I discover who I am, I'll be free." Well, good luck with that. But that is from, let me see, The Invisible Man, very famous book by Ralph Ellison. That's not one of mine. "Owes more to him than any other man living in history." His part of history, that is John Dunmore Lang. So circle 5. "Whatever souls are made of," that's not mine. You come down to 8. "It was a terrible smack." That was Ridley when he got shot. That's how he described it. Okay, so next questions. So put your hand up if you've got any of those. Okay, terrific. All right. Let's see, so hopefully you've got 3 there. Who was the mender of broken men? No. Think Arthur Stace? No. Robert Hammond. Yes, Robert Hammond. Hammondville, and did a lot of, besides the gospel preaching that these men did and the conversion of souls, they reformed the colony. They made the colony into something. Obviously, Hammond is around the time of the Great Depression, but they're making significant reforms in the community. Like Wilberforce is not really in the book much, but he got rid of slavery, so that's a consequence of their Christian convictions. Who placed the cross in the heart of Australia? That's not such a hard one. Flynn. Who introduced sheep into New Zealand and why? Marsden, and why? So they wouldn't eat the missionaries. Yeah, they were cannibals. So if you an interesting account of cannibalism is in the book. I think 70 people. That's a huge, anyway. So the New Zealanders didn't have much to eat. They had fish, but they didn't have four-legged mammals. They had birds, so there really wasn't much to eat protein-wise except for fish and people that you conquered. So, all right, who was called to the ministry by 2 Timothy 4:5? Watch thou in all things and do the work of an evangelist. That's a big hint. Ridley. That was Ridley. And evangelism was the first and foremost in his work, prince amongst Australian preachers. Okay, because Robert Hammond had done so much social work around the time of the Depression, his biography comes back to the fact he saw 6,500 converts in his life, including Arthur Stace. So his biographer says he was, in a sense, the prince amongst Australian preachers. His social work came out of that when he was mending men. So that's Robert Hammond. Great chapter. Hammondville near Holsworthy. It's named after him. And you can go there and see St Anne's Anglican Church, take photos of it like I did. So, all right, let's go with who had six? Who had six correct? Total. 5? You had 6, John.
Oh, he gets to do the dishes.
Well done. Can I ask which questions you didn't get?
I missed 3 at the top, total of 3.
Yeah.
And I put Ridley for Hammond on number 9. I thought it was Ridley that was associated with Stace.
With both of them, yeah.
And then, which other one? And I didn't know that Hammond was the prince of among Australian preachers.
That's a hard one. So you got 6.
I got all the others. Yeah.
So you got 6 right. Well done. And your table will enjoy much reward.
Okay. Other than 6, who got 5? Anyone get 5? Or 4? You got 4?
Who got 4? Me, John.
Anyone get 3? Okay, so there's a couple of tables got 3. So the rest of you must have got less than 3. That's okay. I'm glad you're here.
So I think we'll just go with first, second, and third.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well,
Last, no.
last.
$5 you can buy a book.
Don't forget. Don't forget. You can buy a book. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, John Ram. Thank you, Evangelist Hustler. Thank you, technicians and everybody else. And put your hand up if you want to do the dishes. Thank you. God bless you. Okay. Let's sign off and we'll go and enjoy. There's sweets outside and there might be some drinks and coffee and stuff. So go out and enjoy yourself. So, and dessert, yes. So God bless and thank you all.